I wanted to welcome you all this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really delighted to have George Ferguson. George is an architect and entrepreneur. He served as the first elected mayor of Bristol from 2012 to 2016. George is a founding member of the Academy of Urbanism and helped to establish the Upfest Festival, which is Europe's largest street art festival. George has commissioned artists such as Luke Jerram to take over Bristol City Centre as part of Make Sunday Special, freeing up space for people and arts and eliminating cars from the equation. We also then have Morag Myerscough. Morag's an artist and designer. She creates installations and immersive spatial artworks that transforms places and champion community and public interaction. Her work's firmly rooted in a very personal experience of belonging and never fails to charm, entice, and encourage people to feel differently about their experience of where they are. Every artwork generates a very specific local response, which she uses to create community and build identity within a place. And then following Morag, we have Adam Furman. Adam is an artist and designer of Argentine and Japanese heritage. He lives in North London. Adam trained in architecture and fine art and works in these fields, as well as product design and interiors. Adam is co-director of Saturated Space at the Architectural Association. And in spring of 2020, Adam published New London Fabulous, an article celebrating the emerging movement of colourful and complex design in place. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to George Ferguson, who's going to talk, I think, about commissioning art in cities.
Hello, Pippa. I think it's not all about commissioning art. It's I always think some of the best art in a city is a bit anarchic. And a really good city is one where people take initiative. So the role of a city is to give permission to people to do things and for artists to do things. And so I suppose that came when I became mayor, obviously, then suddenly I had the ability to do more. But I've always tried to include in my work the work of artists. As an architect, we set up the Art and Architecture campaign in the 80s that led to 1% for Art, which I think is forgotten about by many planners and others. And so in my own little way, we've got the tobacco factory in South Bristol, which is, I turned into a bit of a arts hub and theatre hub. It's got there was a lot of dereliction in the area and blank walls. So we started encouraging graffiti. Upfest was set up, which is Europe's biggest graffiti festival. And whether it's commissioning or not, we just let artists use walls, and they came up with amazing things. And the current one on the tobacco factory is a 15-meter, 50-foot high image of Greta Thunberg sinking. It's become a famous image that she's used across the world as her Facebook image and other things. So you can do little things that have a huge impact. And I have a very strong support as art being used to change minds. Because when I became mayor, I was very aware that a lot of the things that I wanted to do were difficult for people. You know, stopping people using streets and roads for driving their huge cars over is a difficult sell. And so I thought, well, let's spend a little money, and I'm talking about very little money, on Sundays with something I call Make Sunday Special. It had no religious significance. The only significance it had was there was less trading going on a Sunday, so it was less disruptive to people, and that we would free up the streets for people to do things. And that was giving permission. And children would come with huge boxes of crayons and make a mess. And I just always thought one of my slogans was better messy streets than filthy air. And so it was allowing creativity. In a little way, it was sort of giving permission to a bit of anarchy. And then when Luke Jerram came along and said he would like to create this water slide down Park Street, it didn't take me more than half a minute to say yes, probably 5 seconds. I think too often we're resistant to those things, and actually they're absolute gifts, and we should take the risk, and we should give artists much more scope within our cities. But one of the great opportunities that we had was that we were very fortunate in being awarded European Green Capital for 2015. And again, getting people to change habits is really difficult. Getting people to, to bring home some of the big issues like climate disruption, climate change is a very big issue. In Between Time, who had a festival who ran festivals in Bristol, commissioned Fujiki Nakayama to do Fog Bridge, and Fog Bridge was turning Perrot's Bridge, which is a relatively new pedestrian bridge named after a slave, a famous Bristol slave, was turned into a small microclimate. So everybody who crossed that bridge had to think about it. And it attracted, I don't know, 150, 200,000 people to cross the bridge in a relatively short time. And they were all challenged by it in a very positive way. And it was a beautiful thing that changed with the real weather. And then we had Theaster Gates reusing old material in a derelict church, in a shell of an old church, Temple Church, that's got Bristol's Leaning Tower that leans almost as much as Pisa. A place that's a bit hidden, people weren't very aware of, and it brought people there. There were 1,000 musical and theatrical performances taking place throughout the night, sometimes absolutely continuous. I think there was a continuous 400 or 500 hours of performance. And it was just opening people's eyes to place and what value that place had. And I think that's something that artists can do so much, but it also was opening people's eyes to issues. Art shouldn't always be about campaigns, but I do think there are huge opportunities. We got massive ugliness in various parts of our cities. Before we had this, the COVID-19, I was in the States sometime, traveling around the States. Very, very ugly bits of stuff in cities, all the sort of utility boxes and things like that. And many cities, even quite, not the ones you think of the great art cities, places like Sacramento have got all this wonderful street art that is transformed ugliness into something really interesting. And so I think that's where the opportunity lies. And it's absolutely wonderful to have Morag and Adam follow, because they're going to illustrate just what I have said is giving a lift. We've got so much dreariness. We've got so much tarmac. Why does every pedestrian crossing have to be the same? Why can't they be different? Why does every fire escape have to be grey? These are wonderful opportunities. They're canvases on which people, both local and national artists, and sometimes we're lucky enough to have national artists locally, and we should make the most of them. People like Richard Long, who does very ephemeral stuff and has done, and has used his childhood experiences in the city to create art that impinges on people's lives who would not normally go to an art gallery. So let's think of cities as galleries, but they can be even more interesting, as we will see.
Thank you, George. That's a great provocation. Morag, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, this Art is Our Expression and Our Sunlight is a piece I've just completed for Brighton Dome, because they're suffering a lot. They're trying to raise money, and the arts, as we all know, in a terrible state. And so if there's anything that we can do that I feel that I can do to help anything, I would do it. So this is in the streets to encourage everybody around to realize, you know, I think this time has made us really think about how actually we can't just live eating and watching television and doing Zooms, that actually art is really, really important to just our hearts, our well-being. So I'm just going to give a bit of a background to my to why I do the things I do. And I think, you know, when you're younger, you reject your whole family, and then when you get older, you realize actually you are what you're made by them. And my great grandfather, I live in Old Street, and just down the road, my great grandfather was born into the workhouse in Farringdon, and it was the most terrible place. And his mother, we don't really know, you know, when you realize you should have asked more questions, but we don't really know exactly why she gave him away, but she gave him away to the circus. I think it was because she wanted him to survive. She did survive, but she might not have been able to survive with him as well. So the woman on the left is my grandmother, my great grandmother, and she came from a good German family, but she ran away to the circus and she became a high diver. I don't know whether you know what a high diver is, but that is somebody who jumps into a very small pool and risks their lives every day. And my great grandfather became a clown, and they lived in France, and they ended up in this permanent circus in Paris. But my great-great-grandmother wanted to bring her son back to London. So she got him to come back to London. And there's this weird group of family lived in London, a bit of German, a bit of French, a little bit of English. And they lived in this house in London. Well, we've lived there for 150 years in Holloway. And then my dad went up to Scotland and saw this woman that he really liked in Aberdeen, my mum, and then just decided in a split second he was going to marry her. And then she came down and then to London and lived in London. They got married very fast. And then I lived in this household of sort of people speaking French. My father was a classical musician. My uncle lived next door. He was a classical musician. My grandmother was a milliner for Hartnells, and my mother was a textile artist. So it wasn't typical of who lived in Holloway. It was quite a sort of strange family, and I never really felt like I fitted in. When I went to school, I never told anybody about how we lived in our house and how we had dinner. It sounds really silly, but you didn't even want to tell people you had dinner at 8 o'clock instead of 5 o'clock because they'd think you were weird. You know, there were so many sort of sensitivities when you were little. But this is a very interesting picture for me. My grandmother on the left here, she was put in this house in Holloway, and she came from quite an elegant family from Paris. Her father was a salon painter in Paris, and she came to London thinking she was going to be in an elegant part of London, and she was in this not so elegant place in Holloway. And the houses look nice now, but they were all tenemented when they were young, when they were in those days. So she got all her family to build this salon for her in the middle, in this house, to have this escapism. And I think that's really fascinating, that when people are displaced, how they want to build the world around them that makes them feel comfortable and makes them feel like that they belong there, even though when they open the door, it's not quite what they want. And next door, this is me and my sister. My mum didn't give us dolls. We had our cardboard spaceship. So for me, it took me a really long time to find belonging. I didn't really, once I'd left home, I never really felt like I fitted anywhere. It didn't work, things didn't feel right. So, and I realized actually belonging means very different things to different people and different things at different times. And so finally, I'd had studios in various places. I was a middle child. we only had bunk beds. I never had my own space. I never had anything. And I realized that it wasn't about children and everything for me. It was about space and about a place where I could make or do everything that I wanted to do. So this is my, so now this is my house. I've been here for 15 years. And during lockdown, I decided to fall in love with it and paint my house. So this is in the middle of, that's a job centre next door. And so I work a lot on my own in the studio, and I just paint make the structures, or sometimes, and lots of people come in the studio and it just goes all crazy and then it goes all quiet again. And that's the way I like being. I used to have a studio in the old days, and I don't want that. I want to collaborate with people, bring people in, and then I like it going quiet again. So once I found belonging, my mission has been, how do you make work that people feel like they belong to, that it belongs to them, they're part of, but you can still be involved with it and make those things happen. So as it is now, when I was little, there was absolutely nothing to do. So I used to watch telly all the time, and I absolutely loved this film. This was escapism. Top Hat is just like, and the most amazing thing, and this idea of going into a park and there's a bandstand and you can just dance on it, and I've been fascinated by bandstands. And so I had this big mission for a really long time, that I wanted somebody to commission me to do a bandstand, because I don't know, there was something about them. They were always sort of slightly left abandoned, but you knew that at a certain point they would be activated. And I really loved that. So I even made all these models. Compared to Adam's 3D printing, I think mine is a bit sad, but I had a go. And so Ditchling Museum asked me if was there a project they got me over, and they said, is there something you'd ever want to do? And I said, I really, really want to make a bandstand. And they said to me, well, Morag, we're doing an exhibition with Karita Kent, and she's an activist, and it would really fit, the two of you would really fit together. And so I thought that would work, you know, that was great. If you look up Karita Kent, she's an incredible woman from she was a nun in the 1960s over in Los Angeles. Anyway, so I decided that the whole thing, it had to be a belonging bandstand, and I wanted to work with 9 communities to find out what belonging meant to them. So Ditchling were brilliant and arranged all these different groups of people, and the idea was that the bandstand would tour to each group's destination, and they would own that bandstand, and they would put the performances on that bandstand, and it would be theirs for the period of time. So I went round and worked with lots of groups of people, and we did all these different workshops, all different age groups. So here we're doing a word workshop, and then this was a very mixed group of a community centre, and then this other group here were a much younger group, and they wanted to find ways of really integrating themselves into the existing community. And then these were the words that came out of the project. It all came from the community, what they felt about their groups and how they felt together and what meant things to them. So then I worked with Brighton University. They painted the placards, and then I painted the bandstand myself in the studio. So this was the crown of the bandstand, were all the placards, and the placards for each community, when it moved, would come to the front of the bandstand. And this was it for the Brighton Festival. So it's part to do with the Brighton Festival. This was on the front. But this is the one I love the most. This landed in the middle of this housing estate, and the building behind is a community centre. But when they've had a Brighton Festival there, different events there, people are often a little bit scared to go in the community centre. That's what George was saying before. But when we put the bandstand outside, all the people from all their houses, they all gravitated down, and they sat down, they started having conversations. And it was so brilliant. And they were saying to me, oh, we really want to keep this bandstand here. And I said, no, because I used to really love going to the fun fair and circuses. I do really think, no, actually it's about it arriving and leaving, and then, you know, maybe coming again. It's not about permanence. It's actually about temporary. So making public. So back to the story of my mum and dad. So I was asked to go to Aberdeen. I was asked in Aberdeen to do a project there about re-looking at spaces in the city that had got a bit lost because the shopping area had disorientated the city and certain places had sort of disappeared. And that was their initial thought with me. But my mum had met my father in Aberdeen. I wasn't conceived, in Aberdeen, but I wouldn't be here unless of Aberdeen. And sadly, my mother had just died a few months earlier. And it was this weird moment where nobody had ever spoken to me from Aberdeen. And then suddenly I'm making a piece of work. And so it was quite raw for me. But what is really important when you're doing this work is working with other people as well. So I worked with a Doric poet, Joe Gilbert. So this is my mum and dad. That was the first time my mum came to London and my dad was putting a show on, and that was to impress her. And that's the newspaper saying they were going to get married. But I worked with I was introduced to this Doric poet, Joe Gilbert, and we sat around and we talked about it. And she said to me, Morag, your parents' story is so incredible. And the place we were doing it in was the Market Cross, and it was a meeting place. So love at first sight seemed to be the right thing. And so through conversation, we built a double narrative, that there was the story, my personal story of my mum and dad meeting, and then the story of the city, of the people, the community in the city, and how much they loved their Aberdeen and how they saw Aberdeen. So Joe wrote a poem about my parents and also a poem with the community about the city, about the nuances that they like about their city in Doric as well. And then there's this amazing Look Again festival, these amazing group of people, and we must have had 100 people, all the mums and dads and everybody, and we all painted. I couldn't stay there for 3 weeks, so they painted all the structure for me. Then I was presented with the poem which I was going to write, and it was really, really long, and it was in Doric, and so I wrote it on site in the piece, and it was raining. But it was a really good thing because people felt interested in me doing it, and they chatted with me, and that was fantastic. But this was also the whole idea of the structure. It had loads of layers, that you would view your city from a point you'd never seen it before. You would look at things differently, and it was a very, very important project for me. Remember to play. I do think, although we're in a time at the moment where we can't interact particularly, I do think, like George was saying, with various things in city slides and things, that it's really, really important to make interactive work as well, that people can be part of, that you're not, I really don't like doing work that you just look at. I like immersive things. So this was in Cape Town, and people just came and sat, they were having their lunch. It was during the middle of a conference thing, but I felt uneasy about that being made just for a conference. So we then gave all the panels to the townships, to a group of people called Seesaw Do, and then they reused all the panels in a library that had been burnt down, on a sports, in a little school. So I think it's very, very important about materials, about temporary, what you do with the temporary afterwards, etc. But now we're living in our new now, which I don't like. I don't think anybody can talk about a new normal, because we're not in a normal. I don't like the word normal. I never wanted to be normal. And so I don't want to go to a normal. So I think it's now. And hopefully we will at some point be able to think more than now. But interestingly, a lot of my work was already being affected by things happening around the world, because I build a lot of structures in different countries. And I was working on a project in Hong Kong, and this was happening, and the project kept on saying, no, we can't do it, you can come out, no, you can't come out, and the demonstrations, and which the people were right with what they were, I agreed with everything, but everybody was sad. because they couldn't go out and they wanted something. So they said to me, there was this little tiny period of time, and they said to me, Morag, we can make it, let's make it. And so we made this piece of work. They painted it all over there. I never went out to see it. And then all the people just started gravitating to it. And I love this, you know, they did sort of impromptu little Christmas things and doing the backdrop and using it as a backdrop, because I thought that was so sweet for the little children. It was fantastic. And then just seeing, because they, you know, in Hong Kong, they were having such a bad time, and just seeing these people back out in the streets and relaxing, it was so lovely, and really meant a lot to me. I think there's an interesting thing about permanence and temporary, and people always say to me, oh, we haven't really done permanent work. But what is permanent, and why is permanent considered? I mean, that's why we're pulling statues down on there's many levels we are, but also, you know, certain things should disappear, definitely disappear, or never exist in the first place. But I think permanent is a very, very strange thing. And so this piece, I think in a way you need to earn your permanence. So you should put something there, and if it earns it, if people really want it, then it should stay. You know, I think you should try things. Anyway, this bridge over at Battersea is probably one of my most permanent pieces, and it's been there now for 3 years, and I hand painted everything that people thought, you know, when things go permanent, people think you've got to make it in like materials and in the way that doesn't give the same life as your temporary work. So I think there's a really big thing to know how to transition between temporary and permanent. But I said to them, it's made of marine ply that lasts 25 years. I said boats are made of that. So I think we can put it on a bridge, you know, on a surrounding, and it's worked. And this is the bridge. And it does, there's a few tiles on the side here. And then I think that thing about taking buildings, so this is a piece that, and transforming them. So this is a piece in Australia, oh God, the place has just left me. Australia's big, sorry, it will come back. Fremantle. And I had to do a competition for the work, and it was about community and bringing people together, and it just seemed that together was the word, and people voted for it, and they chose my piece of work, and it was all hand painted onto this car park. But basically it changed this rather ugly, very, I was worried about doing a car park. I have electric car, I don't have a car, but in Australia people do need cars, it's quite a big place. So, you know, instead of being anti, I'm just like, well, actually, let's just transform that building. So there's some quite complex things you have to think about sometimes as well. And then lastly, during the pandemic, everybody was they were closed inside, they were showing the outside world, you know, that they cared, and that there were, you know, they wanted to show the light, you know, they want to say thank you. So there were these great guys in Leeds called In Good Company, and they managed to take over these billboards, and they said to me, Morag, just do whatever you want, you just want to just thank the key workers. And so I did this billboard for them, and I had like 2 days to do it or something, and I had to think of the words and do everything. And then, but suddenly it gave me back me being able to do what I do, say thank you to people. So when they're in the streets, when the key workers were going to work, because this was a time when it was only them, you know, they had something to look at and something to feel strongly about, you know, something to a little bit, just a tiny little bit of respite. And then they took it further and got lots of artists to do it. And then they realized that actually, and this was all to raise money for charity as well, for the NHS. And then what they did was, everybody, because people had been putting things in their windows, and they made these people's posters, and people bought all the posters, and then they posted them up on Instagram, and it became this sort of whole people thing, which was just really amazing. Then I painted it with these Wood Street Wall guys on the side of my building. And then I think you've noticed, I think this has been in Bristol, but there's a lot of messaging. And I think what my work, I've always incorporated typography, and what my work has really moved into now is about messaging, about, I do feel quite strongly at the moment about using words more in my work. I find sometimes patterns are a bit too passive, and I need to be more active with what I want to say. So the last thing, I've got 2 minutes left. I'm timing myself, 2 minutes. So the last thing is a piece I've just completed in Paris. And this was going on for a long time, and from last year. And these guys, they wanted to, they're called 6 meters cube, and they wanted to introduce some artists that Paris hadn't seen before. And so they came, one of them, they came to me last year, and they had this cube, and the whole thing is a bit fourth plinth thing, but it's in Paris, and it was called Embellishing Paris. And this little square, abandoned square, is quite near the Pompidou, and it's near this big church, Saint Marie. And we were given the plinth, and then we could do what we wanted on it. Well, obviously the plinth was a bit small for me. So I wanted, and because it had been during this time and things had evolved, I just decided that I really wanted to make this statement about called A New Now. So actually the plinth is inside my structure, but you can't see it. It's actually 8 meters high. Normally I would like to go to Paris, paint it with local people. So if there's any money involved, this had a very, very small budget. If there's any money involved and means there's no transport, then people can be paid. I always paid people to do work with me, unless whoever's commissioned it just gets volunteers. That's a different thing. But if it's anything to do with me, I always pay. I think it's really important. So I prefer doing it in the place and the people get paid. Anyway, not possible. The project wasn't going to happen. So I said, okay, I'll paint it. So I painted it all on my own in the studio over a 3-week period. Dog wasn't much use. And then here it is now. And I just thought, this was just a captured picture. I just thought it was so incredible, you know, how we are now at the moment, how different visually the world is in the streets. And so this is the installation, and it was originally you could walk inside it, but we couldn't do that because I wanted to see people to see that I had the plinth inside it. But and the most important thing about this, it was really, I wanted people to really think about now, and about that there is hope, and you know, we've got to keep going, and it's a sort of a beacon to making a better world for the future. So that's me for the moment. So handing over to you, Adam. I've got to escape. Wait a minute.
Yeah, you escaped, Morag. Thank you so much. That was really delightful. I saw someone write that in there.
Out with a bang with that one. I love yeah. Someone just commented the idea of art eating its own plinth, which I just think is brilliant.
That sounds, yeah. It was a perfect thing to do. I think many plinth deserves to be consumed. I'm now going to welcome Adam. He's going to tell us a bit about his inspiration and his work.
Was like super affected when I was growing up by the public art that was around me. Very specific pieces that have basically like wormed their way into my brain and become sort of like part of every single project I get to do. And I think probably the most important one was, or is, because most of it's still there, Edoardo Paolozzi's Tottenham Court Road Tube Station mosaics, which I think I've heard been referred to as the biggest piece of public art by square meterage in the world. And it was the background to my gay life in Soho growing up, and like kind of going through it every single time, every single night to all my favorite bars and nightclubs. And it was the most incredible context. And I think my approach may be slightly different, that I actually love stuff that's passive and in the background. I found that like things that kind of gently and very, very slowly through the kind of fact of just being there worm their way into your brain. And so, for instance, this artwork, I remember not really even noticing it very much, but kind of over the years, it just became a place. It became my entry to Soho. And for instance, just the fact that there's these arches, me and my friends used to take photographs of each other, couldn't find any of them, as many years ago, dramatically going up the escalators or down the escalators through the arches, wearing very, very over-the-top clothes that very often were the similar colors to Paolozzi. Anybody who hasn't been there, I recommend you visit because most of the mosaics are still there except the arches. And similarly, a lot of kind of public artwork that was part of construction projects in the 1960s and 1970s that I got to come across when I was growing up, when there's still this really incredible sense of art and craft being embedded in civic projects, permanent arts and crafts embedded in civic projects, were things that have been lodged in my mind. And I'm showing you the Paolozzi, and this is a fountain in Tel Aviv by Yaakov Agam, which I really liked as a child, because you know, I think I sort of quite obviously riff off of them very, very often. And I grew up in North London, around one of many civic centres that were built around the country in the 1960s, early 1970s, with some fantastic artwork. And I remember just always being really impressed and thinking this was like out of some sort of spaceship futuristic movie. William Mitchell's gigantic cast concrete sculptures on the Swiss Cottage Sports Centre, which was sadly demolished about a decade ago. I studied architecture, but throughout all of my projects, like I always was harking back to architecture's civic projects that I really loved in my experience, that were covered in craft, that were covered in decoration. I think you could probably use the word decorative to describe what I really enjoy. So I almost came to architecture from the decorations and went to architecture school and was told, unfortunately, that that was the only thing that I wasn't allowed to do. So the only thing that brought me to architecture was the only thing that I wasn't allowed to do. I pushed back against that, and all of my student days was spent trying to create a sort of, I guess, a contemporary version of these buildings with their art and their decoration that I loved so much. And also graduating, I've taught for many years. I sort of really try to get students to experience the act of making using new technologies and also craft techniques. So for instance, a lot of 3D printing and CNC machining pops up in a lot of my work and with my students' work. And this, for example, is an exercise which they had to do at the Architectural Association, where they had to manufacture from scratch. So they had to design on 3D, then they had to make the molds, and then they had to cast, and they had to fire, and then they had to assemble one-to-one 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter rain screen ceramic architectural walls, which was really a nightmare for them, but they're very, you know, they produce these wonderful things in the end. And, you know, I always wanted to produce stuff in the city. I wanted to produce decorative architecture and things that had a place in the city, but graduating in 2008, 2 months before Lehman Brothers collapse, is not really the best time to be entering the profession and doing new things. So just having a job was lucky. But on the side, I got to do these really kind of cool projects when I got an exhibition here or a research grant there. And even like small things, I would just put every ounce of all my dreams of the city and like what I would like it to be into them. This is a series of collaborative projects that I did with a startup company in Omaha in Nebraska that are sort of world leaders in 3D printing of ceramics. And this was the world's biggest piece of 3D printed glazed ceramic at the time. And it's a sculpture, but I was very much thinking of it as architectural ornament in the city, you know, sort of decorative art at a larger scale. It's no longer the largest piece of ceramic 3D printed in the world because it was dropped and smashed into lots of pieces. However, the insurance money made the even bigger one, which is now in the Sir John Soane's Museum. And you can see me mashing up. I love architectural history, and I love kind of picking and mixing from heterogeneous different sources and creating kind of exciting new constructions or sort of formal things which reference shared histories in unusual and unexpected ways. Here is obviously lots of classical architecture. But kind of pop elements that I reference from sort of wider culture are very important, as well as color. Even in these very small projects, it's very small objects. This is an installation at the Design Museum in London in 2013, where I was imagining them at the sort of the scale of the city, and slowly over the years started to get occasionally a commission that was like bigger than a pot. And this is, I think, the very first one, which I did with my partner, my boyfriend, Marco Ginex, which was a little pavilion. But as you can see, it's sort of like lots and lots and lots of stylistic ideas and material ideas shoved into a little 6 meter high pavilion, which was temporary. Each of these little things that I did, I was either imagining them as sort of very large scale installations themselves, or as elements that would be on something that was, so I guess I've always wanted to work with architects and sort of design bits of their buildings or decorative elements to be added. And it's, I guess, a way of, for myself, of thinking of it is looking back at the Victorian architectural tradition, where, for instance, Royal Doulton was exporting whole facades made in the most incredibly ornate and exquisite, colorful, decorative way, referencing all kinds of historical periods. They were exporting them to Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo. They were sending them to Istanbul and Cairo. But also lots of facades all over the country were made at the factory on the south bank of the Thames. One building of which survives, which is on the left, and another one on the right, which is a fantastic example of polychromy in Victorian architecture. But this is kind of this generosity with creating decorative art for the public in private projects. That's something that I sort of really still would like to be part of and love to see when it happens. This is a project I did at the Rome. I won the UK Rome Prize for Architecture in 2015 and produced a project there. And this is sort of, there's a whole research kind of project behind this, which was looking at the idea of sort of alternative, with me specifically, queer histories of the city, but this idea, and turning them into architectural objects that are imagining much larger schemes. So each one of these little large ceramic objects has a whole architectural design that goes with it. But the idea of looking at these alternative histories in cities is a sort of call that you'll see in sort of the rest of the work for cities to look at context beyond just the physical context of what is there at the present time, and looking at the interesting groups of people who have moved in, their cultures, their histories, and thinking of context in a much broader cultural way rather than just a material local way. I come at it from a specifically very queer angle. And you can see, every opportunity I have to make something, I'm sort of pretending that it's much bigger than it is, because I would love to do something 8 meters high, but I just pretended this was. I got to do, I've been able to do some larger installations. This is Gateways in King's Cross, which was a series of 4 ceramic gateways, each one having two different facades on either side. It was sponsored by Turkish Ceramics, and the idea is it's a kind of compendium of the history of architectural ceramics, with each elevation referencing a different period. So kind of going all the way back to the Ishtar Gate in 4000 BC to beginning of the 20th century, and the sort of red tiled ceramic tube stations to the front one, which is clearly Iznik tiles, working with the Iznik Foundation in Istanbul. But the idea of a sort of static installation, I mean, I would have loved it to be permanent, but a sort of static installation that can be interacted with in a way that you would interact with just street furniture. So extremely simple way, but that visually tells stories through atmospheres or through sort of aesthetic impressions. And that was very much, it was really lovely to see how the public interacted with it, but it was quite sad to see it be sort of smashed up and thrown away after a week, which is, there's a sort of issue that with doing temporary works that I don't do that many, and when I do them, there's a question of what can we do to recycle them, and that one, unfortunately, the time frame was too short for most of it to be recycled. I sort of agitate quite often, and I write because I guess very often I was making pots because I couldn't make large-scale architecture, and similarly, I guess I sort of talk often instead of or when I can't do. But I've sort of published quite widely, trying to make the case that, in my opinion, our urban realm, through the architectural profession, which is very often the kind of, I know it very well, so it's my point of criticism, but also the planning system, it sort of prioritizes the existing context and the existing material sort of fabric of a place, and it doesn't necessarily foster the expression of diversity in the physical realm, which I propose as being something that actually is very important in a liberal society, that the public realm is the symbolic space of exchange. And the city, through planning, if it excludes that and it puts it all in the hands of a set of planners with academic architects, with critical tastemakers who define exactly what is allowed, then actually the only thing that can happen, which is very brilliant, and there's a lot of fantastic stuff, but is very much kept to the ephemeral and the temporary. So I guess my passion and my excitement is things which are more permanent, because as Morag says, nothing is actually permanent, but just more permanent. Yeah, this is just the latest text that I wrote, which is kind of on the subject, with pithy titles. And I guess this is a sort of an image going back to sort of Victorian England, of the sort of the vibrant, messy, diverse, sort of like obviously capitalist, but capitalist with a sort of small c, sort of, the small shop owner, the small developer capitalism of our cities at the time, where there's a kind of riot of expression. And I guess my excitement is imagining what would happen if we had that now, but with much more accessibility to the ability to build. So it's not just one class. So that vibrancy is exciting to me. I luckily get to do little things now. This was a project in 2018 in Croydon, which was a series of public artworks called Look Down to Look Up, which again, is celebrating the surviving architecture that's outstanding, of which Croydon has a lot. And the idea was that by the road, in front of a building, there would be an artwork which celebrates that building. And then but very often when you're working to work or whatever, you're looking down, you're looking down and you don't really sort of notice what's above you. So you look down and then hopefully sometimes look up and realize actually there's this piece of artwork that's celebrating quite literally the thing that's there. And there's a series of both crossings, but also not crossings. So the one at the beginning was not a crossing, it's actually just sort of an area of the road, which speaks to the buildings behind it. I guess ornamental expression for me, sort of an exuberant ornamental expression where possible, because again, it's a sort of material budgetary question very often, especially if it's in the public realm or permanent, is something that's really exciting for me. So the idea of weaving in stories, narratives, and ideas silently to create an atmosphere and an impression through extremely exuberant patterns and decorations is something I really love to do. And I haven't sort of had that many opportunities to do it, but for instance, this is one, it was a sort of semi-public installation in Belgium, which is a sort of riotous celebration of Flanders as a cross-cultural trading point of ideas in the center of Northern Europe, and obviously deploying some emojis there as well. Particularly that project, which is now, it's actually moving to Italy to be kept permanently. It was just really lovely how it became the point of contact for that whole space. And there were like 23 people squashed onto it at certain points with beers in the evening. So they do very much become points of attraction when you create something that's that loud. 3 minutes, I'm going to go fast. And so that was meant to be temporary and became permanent. I've had the most incredible opportunity of working with the team at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, who are one of a series of quite groundbreaking hospital trusts who have been using artwork. Morag's done quite a few projects like this in other places, but they've used artworks in relation to wellness, and they've got an incredible campaign of creating video art, visual art, interactive art. And I was asked to do a series of very large transformational ceramic pieces, permanent, for the maternity ward there, which are, again, they're static, they're sort of passive in the background, but they create moments of wayfinding and also a sort of uplifting sense of arrival, but very much sort of sitting in the background. This is the reception area. They were in 5 different areas of a very, very large maternity ward. This is a piece which I did last year for London Design Festival, which was the Tower of the Winds, sort of 14-meter high. I also was like, they gave me the opportunity to build, and I'm like, how big can I go? And they didn't give me a number, so I sort of went ridiculously large. And the idea of building an obelisk, but full-scale obelisk for London Design Festival, that was a place for people to lie and chill on, and sort of also have their lunch on from the office workers next to it, and look up and watch. It was a translucent set of fluttering flags, so the whole thing was transparent and kind of moving, and we had lots of people lying down, just staring up, sort of zoning out, looking at it, which included some precarious moments of me almost falling off because I didn't, the harness didn't fit around. I sort of gained a lot of weight and it didn't fit around me. But there was also sort of a nice creation of atmosphere through the installation of lots of sort of street furniture as well around the whole space, which sort of made it a really nice event space. The history of civic buildings and their expression, whether they be sort of town halls, religious buildings, or the incredible tradition that we have in Britain of local town halls and local government expressing themselves in really proud ways, all the way through up to the 20th century, into the modern era with our incredible sort of like civic complexes. Whatever the style, we have an incredible history of this. And I kind of miss that in some of the new things that are being built. Just as St. George's Hall on the right in Liverpool, one of the most incredible buildings in the world, with the Minton floors. And I do speculative projects quite often, which suggest or sort of speculate about ways that we could create really significant architecture, which creates a sense of place in the way that these older pieces of architecture did, but using new technologies and embedded in our current cultural context. So this was a proposal for a new type of town hall. I will stop in 1 minute. For a new type of town hall, which acts as a framework for lots of different artists from a specific area. Obviously, this is all designed by me, but for them to create permanent artworks using materials from the area and technologies which are available now to create new sort of decorative ornament. And the whole thing becomes a slowly growing register of the kind of living crafts of a particular place. And obviously, I do sort of like quite provocative suggestions of what I'd like to do, which will probably never happen. And this is a more recent one. That other one was from a few years ago. This is a suggestion of what might happen next to the British Library. And now I'm getting to work with incredible teams doing actually large scale work. This is in Croydon. I'm working on creating some very large wayfinding beacons with this. I'm realizing how incredibly complicated it is to get anything large done. I'm working with a really large team of incredible specialists to create these wayfinding beacons, which are covered in decorative art, which talk about sort of the best of the local context that I really like, but sort of updating it through a new color palette and through a ceramic permanent material, and creating these sort of huge, loud wayfinding beacons. And also, like Morag, I was asked to do some artwork over the sort of COVID recovery period, but this was in Belgravia, and I sort of did a whole series of flags on all of the main roads in Belgravia with just a very simple thank you note. And luckily, working also now with public institutions to create sort of temporary works inside galleries. So this is the National Gallery in Victoria. I'm creating a sort of installation for their triennale there, which is going to be all about querying COVID interactions, which is going to be fun. And just very quickly, run a research group at the Architectural Association for the past 9 years with Anthony Malinowski, which is, we've done 9 symposia, we've published lots of texts, we've taught on the subject of color as an active agent in urbanism and architecture. Have a look at the website. There's lots of resources for you there. I'm going to skip through all of these, because it's not relevant now, but you had a lucky miss in Bristol, because back in 2013, I was the runner-up on a competition for the Wapping Wharf art project, the art aspect of Wapping Wharf, and I proposed this sort of slightly bonkers proposal to do lots and lots and lots of ceramic potty type things upside down on the soffit there. So it's probably lucky that it didn't win, but one day I will do something in Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. I know what they put in place of your multicolored potty.
Oh, I never saw it.
It was not as interesting. I think they should have gone with you.
It would have been quite mad, and possibly bats would have been in there or something now that I look at it.
Yeah, maybe health and safety wouldn't have have liked it. I just thinking about all your work, and Adam, you used some wonderful examples of decoration on buildings, but some of the earlier ceramics that you showed made me think how we often think kind of architecture should be restrained and neutral, but that's based on a misunderstanding of what classical buildings were, because actually they were often painted in quite extraordinary colours. So I just wondered if you think our kind of taste comes from a misinterpretation of history.
I mean, it's only very recently that taste has become predominant. It's sort of like it's a misreading it's a misreading that's been perpetuated of some of the prejudices from the kind of canonical modernist texts, when actually modernism was an incredibly polychromatic and highly rich and complex movement. So it's a horrible misunderstanding that's gained prevalence, I think, in the past maybe 30 years possibly, because already up until the 70s, there was still a lot of fantastic decorative work being done. But there's a kind of rediscovery happening occasionally on the occasional project, in the occasional place.
It just seems like a lovely opportunity to use artists and craftspeople, you know, in buildings rather than just a very neutral.
Yeah, I mean, especially now, as it's, you know, in terms of cost, I think there was a period, for a long period, where it was the cost was prohibitive, but actually now with all of the technologies that we have, it's really not a problem to incorporate it.
Fantastic. Morag, I loved your story of your family. Of course, you have a circus background. I think that's so perfect, and such a kind of wonderful bohemian and romantic history. I also thought with your artwork, I kind of made a connection when I saw that photograph that Adam showed of the busy, bustly street and all the kind of things that would have been on the facades of buildings, like flags and signs, and I wonder if that could be a way of rejuvenating high streets.
Yeah, I mean, there's that is a way. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a level of decluttering things as well, and then making space for the right things to go in, so you're not just layering on top of shit. So you have to sort of because I did lots and lots of wayfinding. I worked on High Street 2012 for the Olympics, and we looked at lots of things about how, you know, to make space for things, because I think it's good to layer and layer and layer, but it can, you know, my work doesn't look great in the middle of a shopping centre, not usually. It looks much better in a car park or something like that, because it all just turns into a bit of a mess. So I think it has to be orchestrated, and that's why people like George and really amazing commissioners that I've experienced have visions, and then they approach the people who they think are right to be involved in that vision, and then you have this sort of collaborative process of, so you let the people do what they want to do in it, but at the same time there's a conductor as well, or several conductors, or it could be the community, you know, it just depends on who's invested in it, really. And I think that's another really big important thing, that it's really important that whoever you're doing the work for, that they have a view on it. Because I know there's something, I won't say what it is because I'll get in major trouble, but there's a piece of work that's been installed permanently near where I live, and I don't want to see that for 25 years. You know, nobody said, did I want that there, you know, and I don't want it there for 25 years or 50 years. So I think that's what I was talking about, sort of permanence as well. I think things have to earn its, you know, people have got to want it to stay there, or it can come and go and something else can go in its place.
Fantastic. George, if you were the conductor choosing where where to put some work by Morag and or Adam in Bristol, where do you think their work would shine in Bristol?
Well, we've got a lot of water in the city, and I love the reflection of some of Adam's work, for instance. So I think that is a real gift, because you double it, you double the value, especially with sculptural stuff. But I would also look at, the water tends to go through the center of the city, but I would also look at some of the more challenged areas, because that's where you can really inspire, where people feel there's something special being brought to our area that would never have ever we would have expected to have. And so I think it's really important. This isn't just about city centres, that it's about challenged schools, but about involving the kids too, which I loved seeing. I mean, on both of your work, I loved seeing the interaction. And I think that says a lot about the success. Yes, earning permanence, or earning a life for the work of art is really important, and the judges should be the people who live around it. And it's something we are challenged with Upfest, because I get to really love some of the things that have gone up with Upfest. But apart from this year where it was cancelled, usually everything only lasts for 1 year. But there are occasions when we put in a special plea for, can we keep that one for 2 years? But that is as permanent as it gets in that case. But yeah, it does depend on materials. I think that, but I've moved away from where should it be. I think where most people see things, which is the city centre, but where it can have most impact in terms of people's life and spirit and, and fulfillment.
Fantastic. We've now got questions appearing in the chat. So I'm going to ask each questioner in turn to unmute themselves and ask their question, and let us know who they'd like to direct it to. So I'm going to start with Elise Hercombe. Hi, Elise. Do you want to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Amazing, fascinating work. Thank you so much. Brought a lot of joy to my evening. Yeah, I'm interested in, it's a very big question and you've answered it in some ways already, but how do we open up places in the public realm and use art and culture to connect people in the new now? And I'm interested in hearing from Morag first, but it's a question for all of you.
Well, what am I unmute? Yes, I am unmuted. Thank you for that question. I think that the most important thing now is the outside is safer than the inside. So, and this might go on for years, we don't know, do we? So if we start finding ways of using the outside much more, taking over places, canopied places, I don't believe in using heaters outside. I think that's terrible. But I think that if we find ways that, because we have to group together, it's really important for our well-being. And we need, and we've got lots of outside spaces that are unused, and we can do something with it. And that's what I think. And then that gives an opportunity. Things don't have to cost loads. You can build things quite cheaply, and that gives an opportunity to do some very exciting things with lots of people. And the government needs to give us money.
Great. Would anyone like to add to that?
Yeah, anything that can, I love Morag's reference to outside heaters. I mean, they are criminal. And where artists can make life better, make it more comfortable, that is brilliant. In Denmark, which is a lot colder than this country most of the winter, people sit outside having coffee, but they do so wrapped up. They don't use terrible heaters. Artists should be campaigners as well for better urban life.
Absolutely.
I was listening to something on the radio the other day, and they had somebody from Oslo come onto the radio, and they were sort of being asked, how do people have such an outdoor lifestyle in Oslo? And she was saying that this whole saying like there's no such thing as bad weather, there's only bad clothes. And she was saying that literally people will go out and have dinner in like gale force winds and like snow, but it'll just be about what they're wearing. It's like, I feel like that maybe we just need to like design clothes and create clothes that are going to be like suitable to create those public spaces for people to feel comfortable.
And also I think we've all connected with nature a lot more, and I think we do need to green areas, make places for well-being, and because a lot of people do live in apartments. I mean, I've got a terrace, but there are some apartments across from me, and they did not have one outside space to go, they could just walk, but the rest of the time they were in their house during lockdown. And in the end, they turned their sofa so they didn't have to look out the window and see us on our terrace. And I felt really bad about that. And so, we've got, that's all to do with houses and everything. But even if you can't change everybody's houses, we could make a lot more other spaces that are for free for people to have enjoy, with lots of plants. Chrysanthemums, I'm obsessed with chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums in the winter. The Victorians did it. Adam, we'll have loads of chrysanthemums and lots of colour.
Excellent. Actually, strangely enough, our next talk is by architects who are building on the outside of buildings. I'll mention that later. So that's very interesting. I'm going to ask, just quite neatly follows on from what you've been talking about, Jess McCulloch. Jess, do you want to ask your question?
Hello, hi. Thank you so much, everyone, for speaking about your art and what you do. I'm calling in from Amsterdam today, and I was wondering if you could speak about how you feel the role of architecture and interior design has on psychological well-being. And I talk about this because obviously a lot more people have been affected with their mental health during lockdown, the disconnection that we're having in communities. And I just wondered if you could share your thoughts around this.
I think it's difficult because, like, I guess when you talk about wellness, I just think colors, but actually I think first and foremost the most important thing is space standards and making sure that our homes are built in a way that people can exist in a pleasant way that doesn't drive them completely crazy within their homes, and everyone can, no matter what the price or the cost of that home is. So I think space standards, which I think are being discussed hotly now, as they have been for quite a long time, are really important. And similarly, the urban scale, I think what Morag was talking about is so important in exactly the same way, because you need to have a home that you have storage in, you can have a kids' room, you have a place to work, has access to outdoor amenity space. But similarly in the city, you need to have access, easy, walkable access to outdoor space that is healthy, that is green. And everyone has to have access to that. And that's an urban planning question. So it's almost quantitative, I guess, the first things that come to mind, in terms of interiors or architecture or urbanism. Now, then we can get on to the stuff of, I guess, the spatial quality of what is built. But I think, things are so serious where we are at the moment with our housing stock in our cities that I do think that comes, for me, a very far second.
George, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's all important. The human scale, I think, has a huge psychological effect. I think that architects get carried away with the objects that they're creating, but every architect should think about what part does their contribution make to the whole place, rather than just creating an object, an icon. And I think that urban design has become much more important than architecture in a way, which is why I got so keen on setting up the Academy of Urbanism. It's about looking at all those things that make a place. And it's so much more than architecture. It's about movement. It's about the things that people attract people. It's about the atmosphere that you create, and the design of atmosphere, of light, of sound, of all the things that give that feeling of place is complex. It's not as simple as the design of objects. So I think artists play a huge part, potentially, in creating that sense of place which gives people a sense of belonging. And that is what gives people a real feel of well-being.
And I mean, I guess I would also add that, I guess, from my perspective, you know, ornament, decoration is very often even small things. So when I grew up, there's a statue of a lady that someone had put at some point outside their window, way before I was born, and it's still there, and it's become this like real local like meeting point and like a bit of an icon. So like anything decorative and out of the usual, for me at least, really does help create a sense of place.
But if with well-being, interior, because I was never really allowed to go into hospital bedrooms in the past because everybody was a bit scared that I was going to make people ill because of the colours. And then I worked on Sheffield Children's Hospital, so I was very sensitive to that. And when I did my first presentation, they were all the clinical staff, because I think it's really important when you work with people to actually take them along with you. And if you're working with clinical staff who are not used to looking at designs, you know, they've just been helping people survive, and then they come into a thing and we put all these pretty pictures on a screen, they're not going to connect. So they were like, oh God, her designs are too crazy, you know, she's a nice lady, but we don't want her. And so then I said, oh, well, let's calm down a little bit, because I knew in my head what I was trying to achieve. And what I was trying to achieve was it wasn't about the patterns or the thing or anything to do with that. It was to make a place for all age groups, from little children to older, that they felt warm in, and, you know, like a cup of tea or something, that they felt that it was a safe place to be, that they were going to get better in it. And it wasn't about whether I wanted a triangle or a square or something, you know, it was about trying and I knew from working in hospitals and working with lots of patients that I got a sense of how that could be done. And so to make sure I didn't lose this, I made these little models, and then I sent them up without me being there, and then they took them all around to the patients and the staff, and 92% of people said yes, they wanted them. And because they bought into them, they also believed in them. And so now when they're in place, all the nurses love working there, the children like to be there, you know, the families, really important, the families. So I think it's really important now that you don't, which I said earlier, and if I'm repeating myself, but you bring people with you so they understand what you're trying to achieve. Because sometimes it's a very big jump for people as well, and you'll expect a lot. And so if you actually explain and they understand, you either take them to other hospitals or things that have already had things done, you know. So, and I actually, you know, it's very hard to get statistics from hospitals, but people are coming out the hospital faster than they were previously. So that it must be a good thing. And then also I managed to raise the money to build the garden, the courtyard for them from one of the projects I was doing. So now they're going to have this joy garden. So I think all those things, it's not from walking into one room and that's nice and that one's horrible. It's that they're all linked up, you know. And then if you go outside with the public, you know, and there's lots of gardens and everything everywhere, you know, it's all linked together, I think. Yeah, sorry.
And I think studies have been done that proves that it's had beneficial effects in hospitals, both art and gardens, and when the two come together, even better.
Definitely. I think we saw with the kind of Maggie's centres, which obviously don't have, which are cancer centres, that they are often very lush inside and very interesting interiors. And I think obviously hospitals are very limited by their, in some ways because of all their functional activities, but they can be bleak, and that can't be good for anyone. Slightly segueing on, Rob Gregory has a question to ask. So Rob, could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yep. Thank you, Pippa. And nice to see Jess online. Jess and I used to work together and haven't seen her for over 2 years. So thanks for the previous question, and thanks for the panelists. I've got a question about its position within the planning system. I'm mindful of some projects where public art is enforced, kind of somewhat reluctantly sometimes, and wonder what your experience is, good or bad, about making the most of that relationship between artists and, if you like, a conventional design team. And also, as part of that, how you balance collaborative work with work that has a degree of autonomy. I'm really interested in that. The reason I ask is I've been on selection panels where it looks like it's going to go very well. Other times, artists send their agents instead of themselves, and there's just tensions there. And I just want to know what your experience of that dynamic is. Thanks.
I'll kick off with that. On the Bristol 2000 project, which was our big Millennium project in the centre of Bristol, we established a large percent, a good percentage for art. And we had art consultants, and the first art consultant wanted to basically, I mean, we got the impression to build their reputation through this project. So they were bringing in big name artists basically to dump stuff in the spaces. And we rebelled against that as a group of architects. And we managed to get artists who would be more playful. And that was a really vital part, you know, play with what, you know, produced, for instance, William Pye came in with a wonderful water sculpture. He's one of the best water sculptors in the world. And to begin with, he was a bit, you know, he was a bit serious about his water sculpture. I said, you know, regard it as a playground. And it became more and more of a playground, and it became part of the place. And it turned what would have been a relatively boring square, which was the roof of a car park, into a proper play space. So I think public art has got to be more than just dumped in a space, and that was, you know, that was the danger. And it was by us taking back control from the agents that we ended up with a better result.
I don't have an agent or anything like that. And I do actually think, for me, I think it's really important that the artist does connect with the work that the place that they're working in. And if they go somewhere and it's not right for them, you know, like if I was given the middle of a shopping centre or something, I might say, you know, that isn't right for me. Or something, although I'm going to work on the street soon. But, you know, I think that I think it's really important to do good work and come from the right place. I think the artist has to really, really feel it and understand the community they're working in. And if they don't come from that community, they have to take the time to connect and find a way of connecting. And if they don't, because I did a project with the brilliant South London Gallery, who just won the museum awards, and they work with community in such a brilliant way. And I worked on the arts block with them. And when I first came to work with the kids, they were like, what is this woman? And they wouldn't look at me. And I had to prove myself. I had to do all these workshops with them and prove what myself to them, and then they gave back to me, and then at the end of it they totally understood where I was coming from. And so it takes a lot of work, and it's exactly what George, it isn't just about, oh, this is my style, I drop it in there. It's actually, if you want to get a piece of work that really, really works with the people it's for, you have to do it with the people. And also, often the people you're doing it with, they don't want to make the piece. They respect you for doing whatever you do. They just want you to listen to them and understand and come from the right place, you know. So so the work can be as incredible or whatever. It doesn't lower any, by being involved with people doesn't change it changes it because it becomes richer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be as extreme or crazy. And sometimes people think that if you work with community, you can't do that, you know, and that's not the case. You can go more extreme.
Yeah, can I just say quickly that in my weird experience, that I've actually been pushed to do things that are much more over the top than I would have normally done in those sorts of situations.
Yeah. And I don't think you should underestimate anybody. I think I learn so much every time I do a project. And the saddest thing is, I wish that I could bring something from the project before, and then it's like, oh no, I've got to relearn again. Oh God, I'm getting too old.
We just, at the Architecture Centre, we just had a really great experience working with the community in St Paul's, and we just acted a bit like the conductor you were saying, Morag, before, that we brought together the finance, the artists, the architect. I was going to call on my colleagues who've been more involved than me, but I'm not sure if they're in the meeting. But anyway, it was really great, and it turned into a richer experience than we expected, with poems being written, and which weren't even part of it. It was just fantastic. Is
so powerful. In Britain, people love words, love reading, you know, poetry. And I think poetry is massively important for people to express themselves within working groups as well. I think it's amazing.
It was amazing. And also the theme that we drew out from the community was food. It was a lot around food, because that also draws people together. So that was so interesting.
I did a piece in Austria on migration, and we in the end we got all the group. It was in Graz, and we made this space, and then all the groups of different nationalities, they all made their food each time, and then invited everybody in, and they all shared the food, you know. So food is always a really, really important. So that's also is what George was saying about interaction. There's the thing, but that thing is just the beginning. You might make a thing, and that might be, we make that thing with people, but then we go away and we don't live with that thing. Those people have to live with that thing and own that thing, and then make that thing something else and turn into something else, you know. And I like things that can be added to or grow and, you know, have a bit of organic thing. I haven't managed to quite do that yet, but I'm trying.
Wait, what is it that you feel that you would like to do? I didn't understand.
I'd like to make a piece of work that is the beginning of of something, and then I would like the communities or whatever to build on top or add to, or so you may have had communications. So you're the beginning, and you may show people how to paint, you may show people how to work, make things, you may bring all those crafts, and then if they wanted to build that themselves, then they make it grow, or they want to choose different artists to add to it, you know. They can curate it and make it themselves after that.
That would be so cool. Like, you'd have like a whole city that would turn into like millions of people's versions of Morag. It'd be amazing.
No, I don't want it to be me.
No. In terms of the learning skills and the ability to make things. So like the ability to express themselves. So cool.
I think it's appropriate just to bring in a quick comment from Anna from the architectural school, from the Architecture Centre, who says an experienced producer and people to facilitate involvement of local people is critical in delivering any ambitious project well. So thanks for that. The last of the comments on the chat.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think you do need the sort of, I like the idea of the conductor or the facilitator, because we can't all be talented artists like you guys, but maybe we can help.
But it mustn't be a precious curator. It's got to be somebody, it's got to be a people person.
Definitely. Okay, I think we've got like 1 minute left now. So what I like to do at this point is I'm going to thank our wonderful speakers and our wonderful audience. And in a kind of crazy, doesn't always work kind of way, if you'd all like to unmute yourselves and give them a round of applause, that would be really great. And thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you all at future talks. Our next talk is on the 11th of November, and we have Jean-Philippe Vassal, who's a French architect who builds those extra spaces on the outside of buildings, Morag, so people can have some outside space. And I hope you can join us for that talk. But thank you, Morag.
Thank you
George,
all
and thank
so
you,
very
Adam.
much. Thank you.